Chapter 2011. Daisy clenched her phone tightly. But it's been so many days, and I'm really worried. Okay. Nolace coaxed her softly and gently, you have my word that I'll definitely return. So all you need to do is wait for me at home obediently. He hung up the call, and two men broke into the room the next second. Nolace turned around slowly, and a white light swept through the window as if it were daytime. As such, he could clearly see the gloomy faces of the people when they burst through the door. Bear caressed the tip of the knife with his fingertips and grinned. Mr. Knowles, how have you been? The greeting sounded like a slash that could split the ocean and lift the waves. Nolace did not move, and a beam of white light was suddenly pointed at his face as he looked eerily calm. It's rumored that you're a very skilled man, Mr. Bear. Since you've only brought one man with you, you must be confident you'll be able to take me down here. Among the men who worked under Donald, Bear was the only one Donald highly valued. He was loyal enough to die for Donald, after all. As for his fighting skills, even Edison was not as competent as he was. Bear was a professional fighter before working for Donald. He was the type of fighter who would sign a contract to fight to the death in Southeast Eurasia's underground fighting arenas. As long as he wanted to fight, he would fight his opponent to the death. All his opponents would only end up dead or gravely disabled. Therefore, Bear had a great reputation in Southeast Eurasia, and he was the target that all local capitalists would fight each other in order to bet on him. Bear licked the back of the knife, and his attitude was extremely arrogant. I know that you, Mr. Knowles, are the type of person who would use ruthless means to frame others behind their backs, but I'm not afraid of you. I myself am more than enough when it comes to dealing with you. Even if you were to call someone here. He paused for a few seconds, looked at Nolace, and smirked. You would have already died long ago. As soon as he said so, the man behind him immediately took out a black revolver and pointed it at Nolace. A thunder rumbled, engulfing the gunshot. A bright white spark illuminated the whole room, and the glass behind Nolace cracked. The bullet was trapped in it, and it was still steaming. The atmosphere in the room fell into dead silence and grim solemnity. Seeing that Nolace did not even blink, Bear laughed out loud. Nice, you actually didn't shit your pants. He grabbed the black revolver from the person beside him and loaded it again. We still have 4 bullets. I won't miss this time around. Do you want to bet on this? Nolace took off his watch calmly, and his gaze looked profound and gloomy. Bear narrowed his eyes. Oh, are you afraid? Nolace lifted his gaze, and the revolver in Bear's hand reflected a beam of cold light, and it looked like his laser-focused glare. I'm betting that you'll fail to kill me. Bear's smirk disappeared as if he had been provoked, and his gaze looked fierce and stern. Oh really? You're still acting so presumptuously when you're the only one here who's about to die. I really won't mind being the one who buys you your one-way ticket to hell. I've been waiting for you here for a long time. Don't you wonder why there's no one else in this homestay except you two and me? Bear dismissed his threatening question. Even if I were to go down here with you, I'd still get to avenge Mr. Matthews. So all your men can do when they arrive here is collect your dead body for you. Gunshots pierced through the rainy night. One of the bullets shot Nolace in the chest. He fell backward, hit the window, and sat down on the ground. Bear stepped forward and pressed the gun's muzzle against Nolace's head. This third shot will be your shortcut to hell. Nolace grabbed his hand, and the bullet grazed his cheek. It was extremely close. Nolace clamped Bear's body with his legs and flipped his upper body through the air. The moment Bear was thrown, he propped his hand against the ground and stabilized his body. And the black revolver was flung under the couch. Seeing the bulletproof vest under Nolace's shirt, Bear looked sinister. Alright, you're really well prepared. I should have aimed that shot directly at his head. Chapter 2012. Nolace had seen through Bear's ways. Rumor has it that you don't like to take your opponent down or kill them in one move, because there's no sense of accomplishment. You like to fool around with them, and you'll deprive them of their last hope of survival when they're exhausted, so the calmer I am, the less you'll get to enjoy the pleasure of hunting your prey in this fight. That's why you won't let me die so soon. Bear stood up, took off his shirt, and attacked him with his knife. You're still not my match when it comes to a fist fight. No Lace defended himself with his bare hands, avoiding the knife's tip and Bear's attack, while the other man snuck behind him. He immediately kicked the table forward to block Bear's legs, turned around, grabbed the man's wrist, and folded his arm downward, dislocating his shoulder. Bear kicked the table away and rushed toward him. No Lace pulled the man forward and used his body to block Bear's attack, and the tip of his knife stabbed into the man's shoulder. Bear pushed the man away and hit No Lace with his elbow. No Lace resisted with both hands and was knocked backward. Bear's force was brutal, and his attacks became more and more vicious. His arm shattered the desk lamp, and No Lace was forced into a corner. Bear lifted his leg and swung it horizontally at No Lace. No Lace dodged it, and the kick slammed into all the books and decorations displayed on the bookshelf. The man with the injured left shoulder threw the black revolver under the couch to Bear, and Bear quickly grabbed it in his hand. Let's see where you can hide. The glass shattered, and several black silhouettes broke into the room through the windows. Edison ambushed Bear, and the latter raised his hand to block his attack. It caught him off guard, and he fell back in a panic. Bear gnashed his teeth, clicked his tongue, and rushed out the door. The bodyguards in black went after him. Several police cars were parked around the homestay in the rain. When Bear saw the police cars, his expression turned ruthless. He wanted to jump out of the building through the window in the corridor. One of the bodyguards assaulted him from behind, and Bear dodged it and fought with the bodyguards in the corridor. However, the bodyguards quickly fell into a disadvantageous position, giving Bear an opportunity to escape. As soon as Bear jumped out of the window, No Lace, who had gotten downstairs, shot him in the leg with a crossbow. He groaned and fell to the ground, and the rain that flowed down his leg was mixed with blood. No Lace gnashed his teeth. He must never be allowed to run away. As he jumped out the window, Edison tried to catch up to him. Mr. Knowles. The rain became heavier and heavier. The bodyguards took the police around the homestay and tracked them up the mountain behind the homestay. Bear limped and fled up the mountain. He did not even have the time to pull out the short arrow that punctured his leg, and no one could tell whether his trousers were drenched in blood or rainwater. However, it was a dead end ahead, as all there was under the 35-foot cliff was the turbulent sea. The people who caught up to him quickly surrounded him. Rainwater rolled down Nollis's face, and his expression looked cold when the lights were reflected off his face. The police pointed their guns at Bear, and the latter gnashed his teeth. You actually brought a troop of cops. He originally thought that the people who were ambushing him were all Nollis's men, so he was not afraid of them. He did not expect him to have even called the police. You've helped Sandy escape, and Sandy has come into Zlokova illegally. Since you're her accomplice, you naturally became a target that the police would want to investigate. No Lace stared straight into his soul. You have no way out now. With a ruthless face, Bear pulled out the revolver that had only one bullet left, and the police officers confronting him clenched their pistols tightly. When they got extremely alert, he managed to distract them and resorted to a sinister trick as he reached for the pocket knife hidden in his sleeve. He then rushed toward No Lace coldly. I won't be reconciled if I don't kill you here today. Edison realized Bear was planning to drag No Lace down with him and exclaimed, Mr. Knowles. A police officer shot Bear in the leg, and the pain aroused Bear's ferocity. He desperately pierced Nollis's arm with the tip of the knife. Chapter 2013. No Lace gnashed his teeth, clasped Bear mercilessly while in excruciating pain, and lifted his hand. The knife handles slashed across the hand, and blood gushed out of the wound, making it almost impossible to distinguish the flesh from the bloody mess. Bear was still clinging to him, not letting go. Edison shouted, "Help him!" Bear laughed ferociously, grabbed No Lace, and turned around, and the police's bullets hit Bear on his back. He roared loudly and dragged No Lace, who had no time to escape his grasp, and fell straight into the sea. Edison rushed out. Mr. Knowles. The huge waves instantly covered the two silhouettes, and they were nowhere to be seen in the waves. Early in the morning, at the Seaview Villa, Colton came out of the bathroom when his phone rang. He took a glance at Freya, who was still sleeping, and walked over to pick up the call. The other party said something to him, and Colton's face dimmed instantly. "What did you just say?" The abrupt rise of voice woke Freya. She slowly opened her eyes and sat up. Did something happen to Didi? Didi had not been found all night, and there were thunderstorms last night, so nobody knew where she was hiding or whether she had encountered danger. Colton hung up the call and remained silent for a long time. "No, it's Knowles." Freya was astounded. "What?" He quickly put on his shirt. "Don't tell Daisy about Knowles first. I'm heading out for a bit." Freya opened her mouth slightly. "Then what about Didi?" He paused for a moment and turned to look at her, and the solemnity beaming from in between his brows was too obvious to be concealed. "She'll be fine." He did not tell Freya that Sandy had taken Didi away, and he could already guess Sandy's intention without even having to think about it. He picked up his jacket, walked to the door, and stopped at the door. "No matter what text messages you receive, don't leave the house. I'll resolve Didi's affairs myself." Freya pursed her lips as millions of thoughts flashed across her mind. Colton walked down to the living room, secretly instructed the nanny, and left the villa directly. Colton asked the driver to drive straight to the seaside town. At the foot of the cliff, the police had dispatched fishing boats to salvage anyone that they could find, and the bodyguards reported the search progress to Edison on the shore. Seeing that Colton had arrived, Edison walked toward him. "Mr. Goldman." Edison had not slept all night last night and was completely drenched, so he looked depressed and extremely discomposed. Colton stood on the rocky bank, and the wind rustled his shirt. "Have you found him?" Edison shook his head. No, the leader of the bodyguards came up to them. "Mr. Goldman, I'm sorry, it's our fault." Colton had lent Knowles a group of bodyguards. Knowles had planned to lure Bear out, and Bear did appear, but they had no idea that Bear would have the thought of going down together with Knowles. Even if the police and many other people were present, he was determined to drag Knowles down with him, even if it meant that he would die too. The police wanted to arrest Bear, but they did not have the authority to shoot to kill. And when Bear rushed toward Knowles, the bodyguards were not prepared to respond to his abrupt action. Even though the police shot Bear to protect Knowles, Bear still refused to let go. The entire sea was shrouded in a gloomy fog, and the waves were rolling under Colton's feet. The cliff was 35 feet high, and the waves were turbulent. If an ordinary person with no physical training were to jump off the cliff, it would be difficult for them to survive, not to mention Bear, who had taken so many bullets. Colton took a deep breath and ordered, "Expand the search area. Search the downstream ports for him. Bring him back to me, dead or alive." The port terminals were all supervised by the police, and Bassberg had also sent relevant personnel to assist in the investigation. Edison followed through with all the processes. As long as Knowles' body was not found, there was still a glimmer of hope. At around 3 p.m., a male body was found beside the pier at the lower reaches of the Donkery River. Edison received the news and rushed to the destination with the police. Chapter 2014. The police rented a boat from a nearby fisherman to salvage the corpse ashore, brought forensics to the scene for identification and evidence collection, and bagged the body. Edison fought through the crowd and frowned. "Has the identity of the body been confirmed?" The detective turned to look at him. "It's Bear." Edison was startled as the zipper of the body bag was slowly pulled down. That pale and slightly swollen face was indeed Bear's. "Bear has really died, Dell." The detective got up and said earnestly, "We've only found the suspect's body so far, but we won't give up on the search and rescue." Edison nodded and sent the text message to Colton. As soon as Colton arrived at the company, he received a text message from Edison saying that Bear's body had been recovered, but Nala's whereabouts were still unknown. He placed the phone on the desk, leaned back in the chair, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and muttered to himself, he should still be alive, right? He'd better be still alive. Otherwise, I really don't know how to explain this clusterfuck to Daisy. At this time, he received a call from the nanny. The nanny told him that Freya had answered a phone call and had gone out. Freya came to the pier by car, and sure enough, she saw Didi sitting alone on a bench. Didi. Freya ran straight up to her and pulled her up. Are you hurt? Where have you been all night? Why didn't you return to the villa? Don't you know that I'm worried to death about you? Didi had actually run so far away by herself. If she had not taken the initiative to call her, she would still be extremely worried that something bad had happened to her. Didi lowered her head and tightened the hands that were grasping the hem of her clothes. I don't want to go back. Freya took a deep breath and calmed her tone. Didi, don't act up and be angry with me, okay? Now listen to me and come back with me. She took Didi's hand, but Didi broke her hand free and started crying. I said I don't want to go back. If I go back with you to that uncle, you won't want to keep me anymore, so I don't want you to go back. Freya was stunned. Did she overhear what I said the other night? Has what I said affected her this much? Didi had no sense of security and lacked parental love since the day she was born. And Freya was the only person that she wanted to rely on. The thought of sending her back to the Pruitts had undoubtedly made Didi feel bad. Freya leaned over and placed her hand on her shoulder. Didi, are you blaming me for sending you away? Sorry, I didn't consider your feelings. But Didi, I intend to send you back to your grandfather, not because I despise you and no longer want you to stay with me. Your daddy is one of the Pruitts, and that makes you one of the Pruitts too, so I believe that your grandfather will definitely take good care of you. At least you won't feel as aggrieved as when you're living with me, just like how you're feeling now. Your grandfather loves you as much as I do too. She stroked Didi's cheek. I have a great responsibility for who you've become. I'm sorry. Since I started raising Didi, both of us have been closely knitted. I'm not her mother, but I have to take on a mother's responsibility. But alas, I failed to fulfill my responsibility. She even wanted to send Didi back to the Pruitts in consideration of Colton and the Goldmans. She was too selfish. Seeing her bloodshot eyes, Didi felt slightly shaken deep down. She did not want her aunt to hate her. She only wanted to live with her aunt. She pursed her lips and said, Auntie Freya. It's actually Grandma's. Before she could finish her sentence, Didi's collar was pulled by a man who suddenly appeared behind her, and she was thrown to the ground. Freya's pupils constricted. Didi. 4 men blocked her way. Sandy calmly walked out from behind those men with a lit cigarette and glanced at Didi, who fell to the ground and trembled out of rage. What a useless piece of shit. She becomes soft-hearted so quickly. Chapter 2015. Freya gnashed her teeth. Mother, Didi is innocent. You shouldn't treat her like this. Innocent? Sandy sneered and lifted her chin with her cigarette holder. That bitch gave up her own life just to give birth to this useless piece of crap. She didn't even inherit the slightest shrewdness from her father. Who's to blame for that? Freya was trembling with anger. You've already forced her father to his death. Do you plan to push his only daughter in the same direction too? Sandy slapped her ferociously. The half of her face that brushed away looked extremely discomposed. Shut your mouth. Sandy's expression looked horrifying. Nolace Knowles is the one who killed Ken. Freya raised her head and laughed out loud, ignoring her swollen cheek. You've completely lost your sanity. You keep saying that Nolace is the person who killed Ken, but it's just your way of comforting yourself. Presumptuous. Sandy grabbed Freya's hair. You bitch. How dare you piss me off right here? Freya forced a smile. I may be a bitch, but I'm still a piece of meat that came out of your body. However, I've never expected you to feel bad for me. After all, you should have strangled me to death. You shouldn't have let me live and made me bear all these sufferings that come from you. The resentment surging from the bottom of her eyes was no less than that of Sandy's. It was as if the hatred that had been accumulating over time had completely erupted at this moment, and she even regretted that she had been born into the arms of such a mother. Unfortunately, it was something that she could not even choose. Life would have been better if I were to have died in her womb from the very beginning. Ever since I was born, I've never been treated well and loved by my own mother. I've always been superfluous to that family. I've never gotten any warmth that anyone should get from their home, not even a hint of it. All I've ever gotten is my own mother's cold and disdainful gaze. It's my home, but it's as if I'd been living the life of a foster child. Isn't that ironic? And the only good quality my cowardly father has taught me is perseverance and hope. I thought I was not as excellent as Ken back then, which is why my mother didn't acknowledge me. I also thought that as long as I was as sensible and obedient as Ken was, I could be accepted by my mother. However, facts have proven to me that no matter how excellent and obedient I become, all I'll get is the usual disdain from my mother. I sometimes wonder, if I were not Ken's younger sister but his younger brother, would my mother have treated me better? However, one doesn't get so many in the world we live in. Grandma, please don't hit Auntie Fre. Dee rushed over and hugged Sandy's thigh, crying and begging her. Sandy kicked her away. There was no way that Dee could take Sandy's kick with that tiny body of hers. She fell backward, the back of her head hit the ground, and she was motionless after that. Freya witnessed this scene and exclaimed at the top of her lungs, "Dee!" Sandy clicked her tongue, turned her head, and motioned for one of the men to check on the kid. Check and see if she's dead. If she were to die here, it'd be really troublesome. The man felt a faint breath as he placed his fingers near Dee's nostrils and replied, "She's still alive." She should have fainted. Freya pushed the man aside, rushed to Dee's side, picked her up from the ground, and covered the back of her head that hit the ground first. The first thing that she felt was a hint of warmth, and her palm became sticky. It was blood. Dee. She recovered from the trance and immediately shouted, "Send Dee to the hospital." Mother, for once in my life, I'm begging you. She's not even your daughter. Even if she dies, this incident won't hinder you. Sandy took a puff of smoke indifferently. I heard Dee say that you're pregnant. It's no wonder you can successfully get married to the Goldmans and want to send Dee away. After all, Dee is just a burden to you now. If she dies, she dies. Freya's expression looked lifeless as every word that came out of Sandy's mouth seemed to pierce through her heart like a sharp blade. The dilemma, guilt, pain, all her feelings toward Colton, and her guilt toward Dee were all surging frantically and helplessly to the surface of her heart. Chapter 2016. Sandy was happy when she saw how devastated Freya was. Am I wrong? Would the Goldmans be fine with you bringing her along? Faye, you need to know your place. She raised Freya's chin as if she was going to crush her jaw, her eyes filled with hatred. Your brother is dead, so why do you get to be happy? You were born to help your brother, so you should just be a good doormat. Why did you have to work with that Knowles bastard and kill your brother? Sandy shoved her away. Freya fell, but protected her belly. Sandy looked down at her, but I'm giving you a chance. If you want to save Dee, you have to sacrifice the one in your womb. Freya's pupils shrunk, and she looked pale. What did you say? Do you think I will let you marry into the Goldman family? Not a chance. She smirked, while looking maniacal. If it weren't because of Knowles, you would already be Donald's. I owe him one, but I can't pay him back, so I have to offer my only daughter. She shuddered. Have you gone mad? She wanted to give her to Donald, the devil? Sandy waved her hand, and two buff men held her down while Sandy walked over with her high heels. Her eyes were fixed on Freya's belly. Don't move. It'll be over soon. She raised her leg and was going to stomp on her belly. Freya struggled. Stop, no. Before Sandy's foot landed, she was kicked out of the way. A few bodyguards also seized the two men who were holding Freya down. Colton got out of the car and slowly walked over while Freya looked at him. Colton looked cold, but his tone was even colder. Did you ignore everything that I told you? Freya choked. Sandy crawled up from the floor and laughed hysterically. How did you get here so quickly? Do you really care for this daughter of mine? Ha ha ha. Colton glared at her with burning eyes. Sending you back to your country was the worst decision I've ever made. You should have died in Zlokova. His anger could be seen in his eyes. He wanted to crush this woman who tried to kill his child. Sandy wasn't afraid of him. You're such a poor boy. You were loyal to this bitch, but she only cares about Didi. She even put your child in danger. Did you know? She even begged me to save Didi, and I said she had to get rid of her child. Do you think she said yes? Freya was anxious, which made her chest heave. Bullshit, I didn't. Her emotions made her belly hurt, and that made her stop talking. She looked toward Colton with a pale face, but his face was emotionless. Sandy could tell that as long as Didi was in between them, there would be a crack, and that crack would eventually turn into a huge chasm. The suspicion of men and hesitation of women would slowly consume the trust they once had. That all fit into her plan. Mr. Goldman, ask her. Who would she pick between Didi and the child she's carrying? Freya's face was pale, and she was drained of energy. Sandy was good at manipulation. Everything she said was piercing, and it made Colton start to suspect her. Chapter 2017. Freya looked up at Colton's back. He was so near yet felt so far away. Maybe they were a mistake from the beginning. She was a selfish woman who didn't deserve his love. Colton turned around and said to the bodyguard, send the child to the hospital. Sandy was stunned because she couldn't believe it. What? You care more for a child from someone else. In your eyes, someone else's child doesn't deserve to live. Not even your own daughter deserved that. If you look down on women so much, I wonder why your mother didn't strangle you when you were born. Colton looked at Sandy with a blank expression. Sandy looked awkward, and her breathing quickened, but she couldn't say a word. Colton carried Freya and turned around. Mrs. Pruitt, this is the end of your good life. The bodyguard grabbed her while she struggled and screamed, Freya Pruitt. You'll never be happy. Never in a million years. Freya shuddered in Colton's arms, and her eyes lost their luster. Didi was sent to the hospital, while Freya was brought to the Seaview Villa. Colton carried Freya to the room and was silent throughout the journey. The air was dead. The moment he placed her down, Freya grabbed onto him and tried to explain herself. I didn't want to give up our child because of Didi. Her hair was messy, and half of her face was swollen. Her eyes were filled with tears that were ready to drop. But you also put our child in danger because of Didi, did you not? Colton stared at her bloodshot eyes. You never trusted me. She was too stunned to speak. Colton got up and turned his back on her while saying in a calm tone, you knew that your mother brought Didi over with a motive. I hid everything from you because I knew she had her, but I promised you I would save Didi. This could have been avoided if you had faith in me, even just a little. If I didn't send someone to keep an eye on your mother and know where she was, our child would have been dead. Colton had found them quickly because he had sent someone to shadow them. If he didn't do that and wasn't ready, would their child get to see the light of day? Freya was exasperated, but her tears still rolled down her swollen cheeks. I know. Colton turned to look at her, then laughed in anger. You knew, yet you chose to put yourself in harm's way. In your eyes, the child and I are not as important as Didi. She shuddered. No. Colton gently touched her face. All your explanations are nothing to me, Freya. I have never seen your sincerity. I never really asked if you really love me or if I am the only one in love. The madness 3 years ago was when everything started. He had always thought that he wasn't good at expressing himself and assumed that as long as he could get her, he would be able to keep her. He never minded Didi's existence, but he cared about her attitude. After what happened today, he felt that he wasn't as important as Didi and that Freya would even trust her own judgment rather than him. Freya froze as her throat dried. Her heart felt as if it was slowly evaporating. She had feelings for Colton even before the madness began 3 years ago, but she never felt that she deserved him. Chapter 2018. Freya knew that from the beginning. She had let her feelings take over during that drunken night. Maybe it was just as her mother had said, and she didn't deserve to be happy. She couldn't leave Didi, which became an obstacle between them. This might just be the best ending. She closed her eyes and swallowed the pain. Colton, I'll have the child. Colton looked sullen. What do you mean by that? Freya looked like she was drained of blood, and her smile was hollow and weak as if she had fallen into a black hole. You'll be a good father. The child will be happy if they are with you. Freya Pruitt. Colton grabbed her tightly, and the veins on the back of his hands popped up. If this was what you wanted, did you find it amusing to play with my feelings for the past 3 years? Freya lay on the edge of the bed while his expression was unreadable. You would give up your own child for Didi. You feel sorry that she's an orphan, but what about the child you're carrying? You want them not to have a mother too? She froze, but her hand shook. Freya took deep breaths, and her tears kept falling. The nanny stood at the door and spoke. Sir, the hospital called. Colton glared toward the door with such a sharp gaze that the nanny didn't finish what she wanted to say. He let go of Freya and left after slamming the door. The nanny watched Colton go downstairs and looked back at Freya, who was lying in bed, then sighed. Ma'am, when people are in love, both parties need to make sacrifices and understand each other. Mr. Goldman cares so much about you and your child, but what you did really broke his heart. Freya's heart felt as if it was cut open and bled profusely. She felt as if she had dried up and sat there, feeling numb for a long time. Colton got to the hospital when the bodyguard reported Didi's situation to him. The doctor said that she had a slight concussion. There was bleeding in her head, and she has to stay in the hospital for a while since she's so young. Colton nodded with no expression. Where's Mrs. Pruitt? He replied, we have her and are waiting for your instructions. Colton turned around. Send 2 people to stay at the hospital, then bring me to see Mrs. Pruitt. Sandy was held in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town. All her belongings and phone had been taken away, and there was a guard outside. There was no way she could escape. The door of the room opened, and Colton walked in. Sandy scoffed. You're illegally detaining a foreign citizen. If something happens to me, you're not going to get out of this. Colton pulled out a chair. You got here illegally, and we detained you. If we hand you over to the police, do you think they will take action against you or me? Sandy's smile faded. Colton placed a bag that contained her belongings next to his feet, which included her phone. I'm sure you wouldn't want to go to prison. Prison? Sandy clenched her jaw. Even if I got in here illegally, I didn't hurt anyone. What reason would you have to send me to prison? He lazily raised his brows. What if Didi dies? Sandy's expression changed. What? No. That's impossible. She had just kicked her, and Didi had still been breathing. And hadn't Colton sent her to the hospital? Chapter 2019. Something flashed across Sandy's mind, which brought back a sinister smile to her face. Mr. Goldman, you're such a cruel man. I'm guessing you're going to kill Didi and pin it on me? Colton smirked with calm eyes. I can't be even more ruthless than you are. Sandy shuddered because she had underestimated the Goldmans. She thought that Nolace was a cruel man, but Colton was going to kill Didi and frame her just to send her to prison. She laughed. I knew it. Freya cares so much about Didi that she would abandon her own child, so you must hate Didi a lot. If you kill her, Freya will hate you for the rest of her life. His reply didn't contain any emotions. I don't care if she hates me. So what if a woman who won't listen to me hates me? Sandy fell silent. Colton looked at her and calmly said, "Why? Are you feeling bad for your daughter?" "Me? Feel bad for her?" Sandy's hatred was deep. "Why would I feel that way for that girl? I regret the day I gave birth to her. Seeing her cry in her crib, I wanted to strangle her to death. I felt disgusted every time she approached me, yearning for love and attention." Colton's eyes were dark and sharp. Sandy continued. "After she grew up and started to look good, her only use was to marry her off to someone who could give me benefits. If Ken had been crueler to her, she would have married Donald. I hate that useless girl. She should have died instead of Ken." Colton didn't speak for a long time, and then he stood up. "I guess you know that Donald is still alive." Sandy's expression changed, and she turned her face away. "So what? You'll never find out his location from me." "Bear is dead." Sandy was shocked. "No." Colton straightened his suit. "He was badly wounded and fell into the sea with no lace." "I guess that was what Donald wants to hear." Sandy froze on the spot while deep in thought. Colton threw the bag at his feet toward her. "I'm letting you go. Get as far away from here as possible. You'll end up dead if I see you in Bassburg again." Sandy hurriedly left because she was afraid that Colton would change his mind. The guard stopped in front of the car and watched her escape, then turned to ask Colton, who was walking over, "Sir, are we letting her get away?" Colton sat in the car, calmly picked up his laptop, put on his Bluetooth earphones, and said, "How would we find Donald's whereabouts if we didn't let her go?" The guard suddenly understood that Colton had intentionally let her go. Sandy would contact Donald once she was free and even might want to get over to tell him that Bear had died along with no lace. As expected, Colton heard Sandy make a call to Donald through his earphones. Before returning her phone, he had bugged it, but Sandy didn't know someone was listening to her calls. Sandy said, "Mr. Matthews, Bear, and No Lace are no longer alive. I've avenged my son, but I have nowhere to go now. What you promised me." Chapter 2020. Donald cut her off. "Mrs. Pruitt, are you sure that No Lace is dead?" Sandy answered, "I didn't see the body, but I've called Bear a few times, and his phone is switched off. Something must have happened to him." Donald said, "Bear is a very good fighter. No Lace wouldn't be his match under normal circumstances." "Humph. I guess I underestimated him. But if Bear was sacrificed, No Lace must not be alive." "What should I do now?" asked Sandy. "Find out whether No Lace really died. I'll send someone to pick you up from the pier on the 25th and bring you to the East Islands. Don't worry. I'll fulfill the promise I made. Once I get the support of Mr. Puzo on the East Islands, I'll be the next king of Yarramore." After their call ended, Colton removed his earphones. He was unaware that Donald was coveting the crown. East Islands. It looks like Nala's information was correct. It's already the 20th, so only 5 days are left. Let someone tell Mrs. Pruitt about Nala's death so she thinks he's not around anymore. After 5 days, if Donald's men send someone to pick her up, we'll intercept them and send someone pretending to be Donald's men to pick her up. If Donald could pretend to be a foreign ambassador to pick her up, they would use the same idea to hijack the plan. Once they detained Sandy, they would hand her over to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs so that the ministry could hand her to the royal family of Yarramore. Donald's well-planned arrangement would end with Sandy. Even if he was in the East Islands, if the politics of Yarramore was involved, it would become a hot potato for the people there as well. The underground gangs had power over the East Islands, but wouldn't get involved with politics and turn their backs on the country just for Donald. The bodyguard nodded. "Yes, sir." 2 days later, at Taylorton, Daisy got out of the car and saw a familiar car parked outside the courtyard. She immediately smiled and dashed to the villa. "Nolly." Edison walked down the stairs, saw Daisy, and froze at the bottom of the stairs. "Miss Vanderbilt?" Daisy walked toward him. "Is Nolly back?" Edison looked back and hesitated. I'm sorry, he's not back yet. Daisy's smile faded when she heard that. I thought he was back. It had been a while since Knowles last contacted her. She thought of something and asked, did something happen to him? Edison avoided her eyes. Of course not, Miss Vanderbilt. Don't worry. Mr. Knowles is still handling the issues with Donald and is busy. It wouldn't be surprising if he didn't contact you. Really? Daisy squinted. You didn't lie, did you? Edison forced a smile. I wouldn't dare. He felt guilty for saying that but had promised Colton that before Knowles was found, he wouldn't tell Daisy. He believed that Knowles was still alive too. Daisy walked to the couch sadly and sat down. He promised to take my calls and reply to my messages so I wouldn't worry. Edison walked to her. Miss Vanderbilt, I know you're worried about him, but he just doesn't want to get you involved. I know. Daisy pressed her lips together and lowered her head. He always cares so much about me but never thinks for himself. I'm really worried about him. Edison's jaw clenched, and his voice was coarse. Just wait a little longer. He's just busy. He'll get in touch.